I'm Professor Shimon Gibson, University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I conduct archaeological projects here in Jerusalem, on Mount Zion and other places. This is known as the Hill of Evil Counsel. It's a place where, according to Christian tradition, which goes back at least to the Byzantine period, to the 4th or 5th centuries CE, is the place which is referred to in the Gospel account, where the high priests come together to debate the fate of Jesus, where they meet up with Judas and pass over the 30 pieces of silver. But that is the gospel story. In terms of the archaeology here, we're within the compound of the Greek Orthodox. These lands behind, as you can see, with the trees, and there are occasional archaeological remains which are situated around about. And you can see here the remains on the other side of a small ancient chapel, which is Byzantine. There are earlier remains here which can be dated back to the Roman period, cisterns, underground chambers, tombs and other features as well.
My name is Dr. Sarah Salon. As you hear, I'm originally from England, but I've lived in Jerusalem for 30 years. And I'm a doctor by training, a medical doctor, but for the last 20 years I've been researching medicinal plants and ancient medicine and how the secrets of the past can help us look at the diseases of the present. And I'm a neighbour. I live in this neighbourhood of Abu Tor, which I love. And we feel very strongly in this neighbourhood about trying to preserve this very, very precious and special place, which is the Greek compound. Why do we want to preserve it? For the history, which is so special. It's a history that takes in all three religions in this city: Jewish, Christian and Muslim. In all three religions, this hill has a different name. For the Christians, of course, it's the Hill of Evil Counsel, because Caiaphas had one home up here. It's supposed to have had a summer home up here, where the decision was made for Jesus to be handed to the Romans. It's a historic decision that reverberates through history. And he may well have walked here, Jesus himself. We don't know, of course. We have no actual evidence. So for Christians, pilgrims have been coming here for nearly 2,000 years to this place, to this spot where I'm standing. For Jews, of course, the home of the high priest was very important, Caiaphas. But his father-in-law, who was known as Hananiah, was supposed to have had a great tomb erected almost on this spot. It's never been found, but it's described by the historian Josephus Flavius, and we haven't discovered it, but then there hasn't been that much archaeology done here. And then, of course, for the Muslims, this is a very important part of Muslim tradition, that the famous general who was nicknamed Abu Tor because he went to war on an ox, fought against the Crusaders, coming down the hill on his white ox, and as a present he was given by Salah ad-Din all this area, which is named after him. So we have one place, one hill, three names. Three separate religions have thought it important. But of course for Christians it is perhaps the most important, not only because of Caiaphas and the Hill of Evil Counsel, but because two very famous Christians are buried here. One, of course, was the early 3rd century, 4th century Christian martyr Procopius, who was martyred in Caesarea, but who was said before he was martyred, and this is according to the Greek church, that he prayed in the underground chapel that was discovered under the modern chapel when it was built in 1914. And when they built it, they discovered an underground chapel. And this had been perhaps part of a cistern, nobody knows. But it had been converted into an early church. And here Procopius, an early, perhaps Jewish Christian, again we don't know, prayed and was buried here after he was martyred. Here also is buried Modestus, one of the great church fathers who rebuilt the Holy Sepulchre after it was destroyed by the Persians in the 7th century. And he built a church here whose remains you can still see, and his bones were interred with Procopius, again on this spot. So for us, we are standing on a hill which is surrounded by history and legend. Christian legend also says this is where the 3 wise men first saw the star that would lead them to Bethlehem. And this is recorded in pilgrim literature that goes back over 1,000 years. Well, the church that you see with the cross, this was built in 1914, I think together with the stone walls. The land had been along many hundreds of years before the custodianship of the Greek church. They decided 100 years ago to build a new church. And when they were building it, they discovered an underground cistern. A famous archaeologist was called in from the American School of Archaeology, Dr. Montgomery, and he saw this as a large cistern that at some date, and we cannot know when, and he speculated, perhaps Byzantine, but perhaps earlier, it had been converted into a very early church. So here was an underground cistern that had been made into a church. We can only speculate why. But we can possibly assume that if you are praying and your religion is outlawed, then you want to pray somewhere secretly, like a cave or a disused cistern. Was the disused cistern part of the great villa of Caiaphas, who is said to have a house on this spot? We don't know. We really don't know. But the Greek church says that this underground church, which you can enter but only on certain days of the year, and I'll show you a picture of it, was the place where Procopius, a famous early Christian, was carried out and prayed with his friends. He may have been a Jewish Christian, a Judeo-Christian. Many early Christians were Jewish originally. According to the Greek sources, he was Jewish originally. But we do know from the Greek sources, and we know from Eusebius's famous history of the 4th century, that Procopius was martyred cruelly in Caesarea in 313, before Constantine became the emperor. So before this place became Christian, that he asked for his bones to be brought back to the place that he loved, and they were buried under the crypt where the present Byzantine church is situated. Now the second church you see is an old church, an ancient church. Those ruins are said to have been built, or the church was said to have been built by Modestus, one of the great church fathers, who is famous, of course, in the Holy Land because he rebuilt the Holy Sepulchre after it was destroyed in the Persian invasion. And he built himself a church here in memory of Procopius, and he asked for his bones to be buried here. So you have the bones of many saints buried here. You have perhaps the villa of Caiaphas, perhaps, or one of his homes. We know one was probably on Mount Zion, as Dr. Gibson said. You have a place perhaps where Jesus himself walked, and a holy place, which, as you are standing here, I think you'll appreciate is quite unique in Jerusalem, perhaps in the world.
From my perspective, I would like to understand more about this archaeological site. I don't think it should be destroyed. I think it should be preserved for the Christian pilgrims and visitors who would like to see what a site looked like at the time of Jesus. And it's one of a few places, because many of the holy sites are covered over by churches, modern churches, and you don't have the direct accessibility that you would like to have. And so this would be a place, I think, which, if excavated, could be used to enhance the landscape, and other aspects could be done in order to develop it as a park, as a place of contemplation, as a place where the landscape of Jerusalem as a whole can be appreciated, because it's from here that you can see right across to the area of where the Jewish temple was, which is now the Haram al-Sharif, the the masjid, and you can see in the distance all sorts of places which have New Testament connotations, and this is one of them. And the idea of just building on top of this place a major hotel is a kind of sort of sacrilege.
We, the residents, Jewish and Arab, Christian and Muslim, Jewish, are fighting to preserve a place which we do not want to see buried under concrete. Even if a wall is built that cuts off the church part, we believe this wonderful place that, as Professor Gibson has said, is so much an integral part of the biblical landscape of Jerusalem that we must fight. We must fight to preserve it for future generations, that they will see what you will see and can see now, and that it will be preserved for all generations to come.